Hello, hello. Happy Tuesday. Happy Mars Day. Happy new moon. It's a new moon. I think they call it the Phoenix moon. Is it called the Phoenix new moon? And apparently it's also in the sign of Libra. So we had another, actually, I don't know. I don't know what sign the moon is in. Let me take that back. I'm not sure what sign the moon is in today. I know it's a new moon, and I know that it is a Phoenix moon. Okay, so I do know that. And I wanted to connect on this topic known as the Ancient Smiths. Actually, I don't know if people call it that. That's what I'm calling it. And somewhere within my Akashic records, it kept coming up. Okay, so there was a live I did maybe like 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago now, that had to do with the concept of Agent Smith and being an agent, and how sometimes when you're navigating the simulation, you need to play the role of different archetypes, okay? And sometimes you need to see things from a place of neutrality and see things from both sides, okay? So I called it, I think I called it like Agent Smith something and the all-seeing eye. And in the thumbnail, you're gonna see like lots of evil eyes and then like a picture of Agent Smith on there. All right, so this is actually a continuation of that conversation, because in that live, I kept saying, and I was saying it on accident. I was saying, I am Ancient Smith. I am Ancient Smith. And I'm like, why do I keep saying Ancient Smith? You know, I was just thinking like it's a slip of the tongue, that why I'm saying it. But after doing some research and navigating certain dimensional thresholds, I realized that I was saying it for a very particular reason. Hey, Naroon. So welcome to folks coming in. You can always like put your questions, comments in, and as I'm moving through the live, I will be sure to uplift the ones that are relevant. I welcome all questions and comments with the exception of spam. Spammers get immediately blocked, so just know that. And I like trolls, okay? But I do data mine trolls, okay? I love to use y'all for information. So if any trolls are out there, I'm totally down to troll with you and data mine you. And I'll do so when appropriate. But if you are a spammer, you'll just immediately get blocked, okay? So, and then I'll just answer questions or comments as they, as I remember to do so. So it's not going to be like an immediate thing, okay? So if you're asking a question about what we're talking about, look at the description and then also listen. Those are the two ways you can find out what we're talking about, okay? So today is Mars Day. So I want to set this discussion with a dedication, or not even a dedication, a sponsorship. You know, I don't run ads on this YouTube channel, and I do that, you know, intentionally, okay? It just feels better for me. It helps me with my creative flow to not have to worry about being censored or anything like that. That being said, I am playing around with this concept of sponsorship and what that looks like. So I now have certain archetypes sponsor what I discuss. Okay, so the last live I did, maybe it was like 10 days ago now, I said that Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, sponsored this, okay? Today's discussion is sponsored by the wielders of the club or the hammer, the wielders of the club or the hammer. So that would be Thor, Hercules, Hanuman, and Set. And I'm also going to add Heru. I know that Heru and Set go at it, okay? And they are always like, you know, fighting each other. I actually think they're on the same side. The more I learn about the mythology, like the ancient Egyptian mythology, and we'll get into that more. I think that they are a part of the same sort of mechanism working together, okay? So this is a Mars conversation. This is a conversation for the wielders of the club, the Ancient Smiths, okay? The Ancient Smiths, all right? So to get into it, I am going to be quoting a text. This is something you can find on something, a website called Scribed, or it's an app called Scribed. It's called The Ark of the Christos, and it's by William Henry. And I've been like consistently referencing this because this particular text, the author who created this, put together a lot of things that I was seeing in dream state or in meditation, or like, you know, doing a subliminal. And yeah, it was like very, very interesting. So he says in this book, so I'm just going to read some of the, I don't have page numbers. So if this is something you're interested in referencing, then just go on the app Scribed and then find Ark of the Christos and then type in a keyword so you can follow along that way. Okay. So in this book, he said, the Ancient Smiths are the keepers of alchemy. Now, mind you, I just started reading this book maybe like 3 weeks ago. Okay. I read this book 3 weeks ago, and I've been referencing it for the past 3 weeks for some of the things I've been working on. Now, when I did the live on Ancient Smith, which was about 6 weeks to 2 months ago, I did not have this book. I didn't have any knowledge of this book. Okay. But as I was reading this book, it really stuck out to me that he said the Ancient Smiths are the keepers of alchemy, because I kept messing up in that live, or so I thought, where I was like, okay, I'm Ancient Smith. I'm adopting the archetype of Ancient Smith. And why would I want to do that? Because anytime you feel as though there is an archetype that's going against you, it's better to just absorb the archetype by becoming it. Because when you do that, what's happening is you are wearing their shoes, okay? And you are nullifying any kind of opposition, all right? When you absorb an archetype, no matter how gnarly it might seem, first of all, you can see it from another perspective. You can see yourself in it. And this is us transcending humanity and going into the goddess realms, okay? Nobody is perfect, all right? And when you really wear the shoes of somebody, you start noticing that nobody is fully, hey, Jacob. Hey, Jacob. Hey, Yakub. Okay, hey. Ancient Smiths, come on out. Ancient Smiths. Okay. So when you wear the archetypes, I also wore the archetype of Yakub, you know, so I learned a lot through learning about the frequency of the Ancient Smiths, or the Ancient Smiths, through Yakub, actually. So here in this book, he says that the Ancient Smiths are the keepers of alchemy. And I put that in quotation marks, keepers, because what you'll find in these sort of Ancient Smith traditions, which is just another word for like masonry, that kind of stuff, you know, a lot of the stuff where you need to be initiated, you'll find this energy about Jacob Jr. You're not the real Yakub though, Jacob Jr. I want the real Yakub. Who's your head, okay? You just Junior over here. You JJ. Where's Yakub? Where's the Y? I mean, there's Jacob, but then there's Yakub. The rank, the rank matters, okay? The Y usually outranks the J, just so you know. You might need to change your name to Yakub. You get more respect that way. Put respect on your name, Yakub. I'm gonna call you Yakub, okay? So anyway, they like beings who create these secret societies, the Yakubs and all that stuff out there. They like to be the keepers of things. They like to be the holders of keys. They like to be the keepers of secrets. Okay. It doesn't mean that other people can't access it or that these aren't in other people's records, but usually they tend to get a kick out of holding the keys to things. Okay. So it's like, well, I'm initiated into this, but you're not. I know these secrets, but you don't. Okay. So there's a frequency of, wordsmithing as it relates to the ancient Smiths too. So usually when we think about smith workers and alchemists, we first think about working with metal and metallurgy. We're linking right now, Yakub Jr. What are you talking about? We're linking literally right now. We are linking algorithms currently. We're linking right now. So they're big on being the keepers of things, right? I dedicated this live today to the wielders of the club. And I want you to think about the club. So let me read some of the names of the archetypes that wield the club. Once again, Thor, Hercules, Hanuman. Sometimes Set wields a club too. Heru, I don't think he has a club per se, but I'm gonna keep him in there because Heru is like a very much a heroic figure. Heroes kind of in his name. So he kind of has like a Hercules sort of frequency to him as well. Okay, but let's think about the club. The club can be an instrument, right? It can be something that you use to create something, you morph one thing into another. But the club can also be a organization, okay? So off top, we know that these sort of frequencies like Thor, Hercules, these heroic types, okay? The ones who have these big instruments and things like that, they also hold keys to certain clubs, to certain associations, all right? Wherever you can find that word club, you can also create a pathway to certain initiated secrets, okay? This is why clubs are created, associations are created. Next, let's go further. I mentioned in one of my lives, I think it was called Back to Black, but I was mentioning because as I was going into the realms of the priesthood, one thing I was learning was that, we think the priesthood is in the church, right? And not to say that the priesthood isn't in the church. That's one aspect of the priesthood. But when you start getting into the frequency of the ancient Smiths and the bards, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the bards in a bit. You are getting into more of the energy of the arts. They hold the keys, or they used to hold the keys to the arts, okay? And who got into the arts, who would thrive in the arts, and then who would not, okay? And we can see this in where do people usually go, right? Or at least where did they used to go? I don't know how much. I'm sure they're still popular. They're just not as popular as when I was coming up. Clubs. People go to clubs, right? They go to nightclubs to dance. Okay, this is showing you. Whenever you see the word club, it's showing you that there's a frequency of some kind of initiation happening. You'll start looking at some of the bigger name DJs and stuff like that, or some of the bigger name artists. And if you look at their birth charts, what you'll see is they've been initiated, okay? This is where we get into the frequency of Illuminati, okay? But Illuminati, let's not take it too seriously, okay? We have all of these conspiracy channels out there that talk about how bad the Illuminati is, how they're so evil and this and this and that. But really, it's more about wordsmithing. It's more about having the codes to who's in and who's out, okay? So taking a lot of the seriousness out of Illuminati is helpful, because sometimes you might want to learn more about those frequencies, because through that you can learn more about information that's been hidden from you. Some of the information might even be yours, that might even be from a particular bloodline that you come from. So the more we can wear the shoes of adversarial energies, then the more we are able to gain more information. Okay, so at this time when I was doing a live on Agent Smith, I kept saying, I am Agent Smith, but I would slip up and I would say, I am Ancient Smith. And I was like, I don't know why I keep saying that. But as I was reading this book, The Ark of the Christos by William Henry, it made a lot of sense, okay? So he says the Ancient Smiths are the keepers of alchemy. It is significant to note that the German name Schmidt is also known as Smith, was once referred to a priestly caste of metalworking shamans who were bards or poets. Okay, so bards, we'll talk more about what bards are, but the similarity of Schmidt and Shemiti leads one to conclude that they're the same word. So Shemiti is a word that you can find in the Sumerian language, and it means breath, wind, and life. So off top, when we're thinking about this word Shemiti, it's giving something around spirit, it's giving something around air, and something about life force, okay? So something about the frequency of ancient Smiths connects to breath, wind, and life force. Okay. Okay, next I want to say, and this goes back to the nightclubs. So in this book called The Ark of the Christos, William Henry also breaks down that shamanism or smithcraft, or shamans or smiths were technicians of ecstasy. Technicians of ecstasy. Oh, I'm going back to the nightclubs with it. I'm getting back into the nightclubs. What they used to like to do in the nightclubs, they still probably do it. Ecstasy. They're technicians of ecstasy. These technicians all speak a secret language, the language of the bards or birds, which they learn directly from gods or spirits. Directly from gods or spirits. Okay, so let's bring in the energy of the birds from another perspective. Let's think about the frequency of the Sibyls. Okay, the Sibyls were known to be a class of oracles. They were specifically women, and they were around the times prior to patriarchy, but they also witnessed the quote unquote fall, I'll put that in quotation marks, the quote unquote fall of matriarchy. And they were, when the priests were taking over, when they were taking over different forms of administration and all of that, and when we saw the transference of power from matriarchy to patriarchy, the Sibyls were there, and they were still highly regarded. They were highly regarded by kings, they were highly regarded by priests, but slowly what you noticed is a transference of power. And these Sibylline priestesses, they were close to the waters. They were also known as having a communication with the birds, but also having a communication with the serpents, okay? And they were known as being serpentine priestesses. So as the transition from matriarchy to patriarchy happened, the Sibyls were there, and their skills were utilized. It's just that their energies got more and more distorted, until when the quote unquote takeover of patriarchy happened, they then started to become more like crazy women. Okay, they started, even if you look at, there's a movie that came out in the 1970s about a woman who had multiple personality disorder. Okay, and they called that movie Sibyl. This kind of shows the fall in quote power of the Sibyls, okay? Because at one point they were highly regarded. A king would not make a decision without a Sibyl. Okay, a king would not make large scale decisions or would not host a ceremony unless a Sibylline priestess was there. They were highly regarded. But at some point around the time when more rational thinking was introduced into society, it transitioned from the Sibyls being highly regarded to, kind of like the crazy women intuition sort of thing. It's like, oh yeah, you saw that in a dream. Spirit told you about that. Sure. The gaslighting came in. So gaslighting only happens with rational thinking. Okay. Because when you are in touch with your intuition, when you are in touch with your inner knowing, you can't be gaslit. Like somebody can try, but they'll just look stupid because you know what you know. But with the rise of rational thinking, which created an end of an era where intuition or your pineal gland was more open, and this is a lot more connected to serpentine sort of wisdom. Okay, this is when we get into the frequency of the Kundalini and all of that as well, and the Uraeus. Okay, the way that a lot of Egyptian monarchs used to wear the serpent on, like right at their forehead. They did that for a reason, to indicate their connection with spirit. Okay, so as this loss in consciousness happened, well, then so did the loss of status of the Sibyls. But here's the thing: the Sibyls still were around. It's just that their energy started to be harvested in a different way. So we can see this in a lot of different examples. So for example, if we look at the Vatican Church today, that is literally built on top of a Sibylline temple. Okay, it's literally built on top of a temple of Sibyls. There's also a frequency of matriarchy that was alive and well in the Americas. Okay, this was around the times of the Native Americans, not necessarily the ones that we learned about in schools for folks who got an American education, but a lot of times this was a group of Native people who were hidden from history. And a lot of temples were also created in the Americas, and a lot of these societies were more matriarchal. And one thing that you notice is there was a similar trend, the same thing that happened in the Vatican, where they built a temple on top of an old temple, almost as if to harness that energy. That same thing was happening in other places around the world. There's even a place in Illinois, in the United States, in Middle America, known as the Cahokia Mounds. And it's a very, very large scale city. At one point, it was an extremely advanced civilization, much larger than Chicago, which is the closest, largest city to Cahokia Mounds. It was larger even than that. And it had hundreds and hundreds of mounds, okay? And you can even find one of those mounds today, which is called Monk's Mound. And the reason why it's called Monk's Mound is because basically a bunch of Catholic monks, they saw those mounds and they built their own sort of institutions on top of it. I can't remember the name of the pyramid I went to last year. It's in Mexico. It's the largest pyramid complex in the Americas. But a similar thing happened. I'll have to put it in the description. And I did like some shorts on it a while ago. But a similar thing happened to those pyramids, where basically some Catholic priests came and they said, oh, look, there's a huge pyramid complex. Let's put a church in front of it, or let's put a church on top of it. So this wasn't just happening randomly. This was a coordinated effort of the priesthood going around looking for the frequency of old civilizations, harnessing the energy, okay? Because a lot of these civilizations, they were built on specific energy points, energy vortex centers, okay? So it wasn't just that they would just randomly build somewhere because the rent was cheap or whatever. No, like shamans, oracles would scout the area. There's more oracles than shamans. We'll get more in. The shamans are more of the Ancient Smiths, okay? That's more of the reboot of spirituality. But what they would do is they would, back in the day, they would connect with the land. They would commune with the land with a process known as animism, where animism is basically an energy that says that everything has energy, everything has consciousness. There is no hierarchy, right? So a tree has consciousness, a rock has consciousness. The soil has consciousness. Everything has spirit. Now, what happened in the Americas was a rise in monotheism. Monotheism. The closest you can find to this, okay, and this is where we get a little controversial, okay, and yes, we're still talking about the Ancient Smiths and the Bards. It's all connected. But here's the thing. As I was preparing for this talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to string this together? Because when you're dealing with the energy of the bards, the Ancient Smiths, They are such tricksters. You are dealing with the crossroads. You are dealing with the frequency of Hermes. You are dealing with the frequencies of Thoth. Now, they'll tell you that Thoth is the creator of writing. That is absolutely not true. Before there was Thoth, there was Seshat, okay? So Thoth was kind of like Seshat's student. So Seshat was kind of more of the Sibylline priestess at the time who got her information or her energy siphoned by the frequency of Thoth. Okay, it's a similar thing, all right? They're telling you the same story in different ways. Same thing, Marduk and Tiamat, all right? What is the other one? Sophia and Yaldabaoth. They tell you the same story in so many different ways, okay? So, but that being said, the bards are such wordsmiths. I mean, they know how to take one idea and section it off into several different ideas and make them look as though they're completely different from each other, all the while they're the same. They're really, really good at doing that. So that being said, stringing some of these things together, you know, I got to have my bard on. I got to have my ancient smith on. That's why I'm calling in the frequencies of Thor and Hanuman and Set and Heru and Hercules, okay? They have these same frequencies. You know, Heru, let's talk about Heru for a second, because, you know, he's the hero, right? He's the hero. But here's what we don't talk a lot about with Heru. You know, in some stories, he cut off his mother's head. He beheaded his mother. He needs his ass whooped for that. Yeah, Heru. Heru beheaded Isis. Heru beheaded Aset in some of the stories. He got mad at her because he said that she was taking Set's side too much, his enemy, and he cut off her head. Some hero, right? Some hero. We want to tell all this stuff about Set, but at least Set didn't cut off his mom's head. That's kind of wild right there. But the energies of beheading appear in other ways as well. Okay, so all that to say, the ancient Smiths originated in the Americas, okay? When we think about smithcraft, usually we'll go to Europe or possibly we'll go into the frequencies of Egypt. But there's a story prior to those times. America is the true old world. There are writings about this. You know what? I'll actually make a note to create some links for people who are interested in this, you know, who are genuinely curious about this topic, but have never heard of this information before. I will put it on my list to make some links, put together some links for folks of some books and some articles and some videos that are not peer reviewed. It's, you know, peer reviewing is just a form of egregores. It's a way that the ancient Smiths have, or the Ancient Smiths have created hierarchy. So they won't necessarily be peer reviewed, but they'll be very highly documented, okay? So there is a story around the Americas being the true old world. You know, even the energies of Machu Picchu, you know, they want to say that the Incas created Machu Picchu. Not true. Even when I went to Machu Picchu and I was, I don't trust tour guides, because whenever I go to different ancient sites, I have to tap in with the land. I'm an animist, okay? I go based on the ancestors way, way back before monotheism. So I'm connecting with the spirit of a place. I don't need to have a tour guide tell me what happened, because a lot of times they don't know. And a lot of times they're just regurgitating the, you know, streamlined information of what they're approved to say, okay? Because they're hired by certain people, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times when I would go on tours, the reason why I decided to stop going on tours, well, first of all, it's just annoying. Like, I don't want somebody to curate my experience. I would prefer to work with the land and spirit to do that. But I would notice, I'm like, y'all have different stories. Like, your stories aren't adding up. And that's what I saw when I was in Machu Picchu a few years ago. I'm like, y'all saying a whole bunch of different stuff. I don't even know if y'all really know what happened. Okay, and there were also overlays. So yes, there are some Incan sort of architectures in Machu Picchu, but they're overlaid. It's a similar thing that happened with the Vatican, that happened in Mexico, that happened in Monk's Mound in Illinois. There's these overlays. This is the work of the ancient Smiths. They are the keepers. Keepers. That's what they're big on doing. They like to keep things. It's really not about them originating. It's about them holding on to things, locking things up, and then being the gatekeepers of things. That's what the ancient Smiths are really, really good at. They're also really good at creating, they're good at creating tools. I'll give them that. They're really, really good at creating tools. But sometimes what they'll do, the way they'll tell their history, is to make it seem as though they have a special insight into certain minerals or certain metals or certain alchemical principles. That's not it at all. They didn't even create them to begin with, okay? They just built the gates. Bill Gates built the gates. They just built the gates to keep this information enclosed. They didn't actually originate anything, okay? But they're really, really good at building gates. I'll give them that. I'm learning a lot about gatekeeping from the ancient Smiths. So shouts out to all the ancient Smiths out there. I see y'all. I appreciate y'all. Okay, y'all telling me a lot about gates, a lot about keys. All right. So anyway, America's the true old world. And there was a rift that happened. You can find this story. You can find the story in Moses. You know, the ancient Smiths, they're going to tell the story. They're just going to tell it in a mythology that suits their needs. And they'll put it in their religious monotheistic texts and things like that. They'll put it in movies. They'll put it in music. They'll tell you. They will definitely tell you what went down. It's just up for you to put the pieces together. Okay, there's a trickster element with the ancient Smiths as well, because they're wordsmiths, all right? They like to play with words. They like to play with puns. It's never just what you see at face value. There's also a hidden meaning that you need to discern, a riddle that you need to discern when you're in the realm of the ancient Smiths or the bards, okay? When you're speaking the language of the birds or the bards. Okay, things are not as they seem. And there's a big old bird out there. I forgot the name of this bird. I don't know if y'all can hear it in the background, but he is loud. He is very, very loud. But when I identified the bird using one of these apps, I forgot the name off top, but it's a Taino name that means chief. And this chief bird has been coming up to the window several times a day. So I'm taking that as some affirmation, okay? Because we're talking about some of the hidden indigenous history of the Americas. And we have a chief bird that's cooing and cawing, all right? Actually, the birds they've been on one since I've been here. I'm in the Amazon rainforest, and a lot of this stuff, there's a lot of channelings I'm getting about different, I'm putting a lot of pieces together right now, a lot of pieces. And for whatever reason, whenever I go to South America, the land and the spirit of the land always wants to speak to me about Europe. Like they just want to tell me about Europe all day. It's wild. Yeah, you would think that that would be more of a thing that would happen when I'm in the United States, you know, because there's a lot of European history in the United States. But no, whenever I'm in South America, they want to tell me all about Europe, okay? Specifically the Celts, all right? And they want me to really start articulating this information around the ancient Smiths. So we're getting into it, all right? We're getting into it. So with that, the America's a true old world, and there is this history around there being a rift with the indigenous folks, okay? There became a rift, and they were more what we would call melanated. We'll call them melanated. They weren't from Mongolia, okay? And I have that ancestry too. Before anyone tries to come for me, not like I really care if you do try to come for me, to be honest. Actually, try to come for me. I like it. Yeah, I like it. I get a little kick out of some trolling. It gives me a little life force, a little, what y'all call it? Shemiti. Breath, wind, life, okay? So y'all can come for me, but I got Mongolian blood, okay? All right, so I got my grandmother on my father's side literally grew up on the reservation in South Dakota, Okay, so I have that particular ancestry too. So there was a time when I thought that the Native Americans were that. And that's a part of my heritage. And I proudly will say that. But it became very clear to me, especially when I was doing travels in Africa, that no, a lot of your ancestors are from the Americas, yo. They're not from Africa. Like, even though you got your little African American studies degree and you taught African American history in Africa and you were volunteering and doing all this stuff and being down and all this stuff, African American Student Union, no, that is not your history. It was really, really clear to me. And when I got to Africa, specifically when I got to Egypt, and I've shared more about this story on this platform, it was clear to me. And what was revealed to me was the story of Akhenaten. So that's when when it came into my algorithm, who Akhenaten was, because I don't know if anybody has this particular energy related to Akhenaten, but I was always just really magnetized to this ruler, Akhenaten. I couldn't understand why. And he was kind of a jerk, you know, at least that's how they say it. He was kind of like he was a totalitarian sort of ruler. He was a part of the 18th dynasty in ancient Egypt, as the story goes. And he wanted to bring monotheism to ancient Egypt. And they say it's in North Africa. And there's a version of Egypt in North Africa. I'm not trying to take that Egypt shine away. I've been there. I lived there for a bit. It's cool. I like it. That being said, that's not the original, though. That's the overlay. Okay? That's the overlay. And you can tell, too, because the star system that they have those great pyramids by is right by that star system, Orion, the hunter. The hunter has a lot of tools. Orion got a lot of tools. You notice that? Orion is an ancient Smith. It's giving Thor. It's giving Hercules. It's giving Hanuman. It's giving Set. That's Orion. Okay, that's the ancient Smiths. But that's the overlay. So what's interesting is that another word for Akhenaten, another name he had was Tutmosis. Tutmosis sounds like Moses, right? From the Bible. Remember how Moses, he had to take his, and I didn't go to Sunday school or none of that, y'all, okay? So I'm not going to get it all perfect, but basically he had to take his people, right? He had to make an exodus, okay? And they had to do all these little miracles to make these exoduses and all that and leave because they were being persecuted or whatever for their religion. That happened in the Americas, yo. That happened in the Americas. There was a group of beings, and I say beings because I think that there's an interdimensional aspect that we're not really getting to with this, you know. And even if when you look at Akhenaten, he look a little different. He look a little different. He looks melanated, but he look a little different. He kind of has like a vague look of Roger from American Dad. Is that the name of that show? American Dad, that alien Roger. Like if you look at the side profile of Akhenaten, it reminds me of that. If you just put like a pharaoh's, headdress on him, and so it would have a similar kind of quality. Okay, so I think that there was some kind of an interdimensional aspect because a lot of the energies, like especially in Machu Picchu and other places in South America, there was like more interdimensional contact that was happening. Okay, a lot of things that they can't quite explain, at least not through the human lens, all right, was happening in South America back in those times. So there was a frequency of a large cultural difference that happened. There's an Ascension website that talks about this. It is called, not Ascension Glossary, it's called Aligning with Earth. A couple of years ago, I was referencing this more. But in this website, this channeler, she gets a lot of channelings about like the original sort of histories of the Americas. And something about this story of Tutmosis or Akhenaten and his Aten and his monotheistic religion that he was bringing into Egypt, wherever Egypt is. I'm saying it was in the Americas, okay? And that's another thing. When I go into South America and also parts of Central America, they sure do like to put in Egyptian mythologies. They like to just be putting up random Egyptian statues. I'm like, interesting. Okay, that's real interesting. But anyway, in this website, the channeler, her name's Asurana, she talks about how there was this energy of these beings known as the Black Assyrians, that basically something happened with their starcraft where they basically crash landed. Okay, getting a siren. All right, I'm getting, that's an affirmation of some kind. They basically like crash landed onto Earth, and they were really, really different, and they weren't accepted by what she refers to as the Red Nations people, the indigenous Red Nations people. She mentions that these Black Assyrians, they were very highly melanated, and the Red Nations people were also melanated, but there was a difference, okay? There was a kind of a different sort of energy with them. And basically the Red Nations people and the Black Assyrians did not get along. And it got to the point where the Black Assyrians basically made the Red Nations people's life a living hell, and spread diseases to them and did all this stuff to oppress them, okay, because they were butting heads. Now she places this energy more in Africa, like because she I think she even mentioned Egypt, but that's assuming that Egypt is in Africa. Okay, there's another sort of history, and once again, I will put together some links with more information about this, okay, where basically that happened in the Americas, specifically South America. There was a priesthood that developed in South America that really wanted monotheism, okay, similar to Akhenaten's Aten. Basically, the Aten was this little sun disk, and he wanted everybody to worship this sun disk, okay? And other people, they were like, we're animists. Like, spirit is everywhere. You can't just put spirit in this sun disk. And Akhenaten was like, oh, yes, we can, and we will. And it wasn't just a simple thing of like, hey, we want to believe in this thing, so we're going to do that. And then the indigenous people were like, oh, you can't believe in that, we're kicking you out. No, what happened was that this group of people, they wanted to impose this monotheistic religion onto everybody around them, and they ended up getting expelled because of it. This is the story of Akhenaten, or Tutmosis, or Moses, okay? So this was more of an energy that happened in the Americas. Well, what happened to these beings after? They traveled a lot. They are known as the Moors, okay? They are known as the Moors. And you know what? I also have Moorish lineage as well. That's been made very apparent to me. So there's an energy that I have of like the indigenous folks that kept their belief system of animism, and that's running through my blood and DNA. There's also an energy of more of the Mongolian sort of frequency that's in my blood and DNA. Okay, the overlay Native Americans. And then I have also in my DNA the Moors, the ones who were like, no, we will be monotheistic and all that kind of stuff. That's also in my DNA. That's what I've had to reconcile. And that's why I created a lot of the content that I've created on Patreon around genetic path cutting, okay? Because, you know, there's a lot of beings, like you might be experiencing certain forms of, quote, spiritual warfare, but really what it is you have these records that have not been reconciled within you. And it's like your cells are fighting each other. Your memories are fighting each other. Your Akashic records are fighting each other. And a lot of times what's going to happen is that might show up in your relationships, okay? Until you resolve those frequencies, okay? We got the chief bird going off, okay? Until you resolve these frequencies, it'll just keep replicating in your world or in your algorithm. And this was made clear to me when I was starting my journey of, you know, accessing my Akashic records and connecting with my higher self. That's what I saw in my meditation. I saw a very angry Black man, Indian chief, who basically was like, look, until you deal with this, I didn't even know who he was. I was like, why is he wearing this big old chief headdress and he's a Black man? I don't know what that is. But, you know, it led me into a journey of like, hey, you need to reconcile this history that's in your DNA. Okay. this hidden history. You need to know who you are. You think you're African, that's not true. And you know what happened, what the ancient Smiths, what the Moors, what the energies of the Akhenaten dynasty, what they did was, well, they had a vendetta. It makes sense, right? If you get ousted from your land, and you know, they want to do all this stuff to say that Africa's like the oldest, has the oldest civilizations. All right. There's a very strong narrative to say that, for sure. I studied it. But, you know, as somebody who studied African American studies at elite institutions, you know what I always thought about in class? Because I would take I wanted to take all those classes, you know, the Afrocentrism classes and all that. And I was always like, this is not a lot of history that they have. Like, why are these books so thin? Why are these books on Afrocentrism and all this? Like, why are they so, it didn't seem like a lot. I always felt that. I'm like, I wish there was more. And when I would ask the professors, they would always be like, well, you know, they were an oral society, so a lot of stuff wasn't written down. I was like, okay, you know, and I took that. But now looking at this other history, this hidden history underneath the overlay, it actually makes a lot of sense. I'm like, oh, like a lot of this stuff was invented, you know? So anyway, the beings known as the 18th dynasty, you know, Akhenaten's family, they went on a mission where they basically, well, they're also very smart, you know, very technologically savvy. They were working with other things not of this earth too. Okay, they were working with other things not of this earth. This is also where we get into the frequencies of Yaqub. Yaqub came and visited my comments earlier. Jacob. All right, and we get into the energies of Jacob and Esau. We get into the energies of Cain and Abel. All right, we get into the energies of Yaqub. Okay, there was a vendetta. Yeah, there was a part, you know, there was a family aspect. You know, in some ways, those beings, you know, even though they had different belief systems, one wanted to be more animistic and another wanted to be more monotheistic. I am venturing to say that they were kind of like more brothers or more brothers and sisters. You know, they had similar family. Maybe something happened to cause a rift, but I think that they were more similar than they were different. That being said, you know, as the stories go with those betrayals, you know, those betrayals of the siblings, whether it's Cain and Abel, whether it's even the energies of Set and Heru, because they were family as well. Not all family gets along, right? We know that firsthand. You know, you can have a karmic family member. Yeah, y'all have the same blood. That doesn't mean that family member doesn't want to destroy you. Okay, that happens all the time. So they documented these sort of frequencies. So once they got expelled from the Americas, they started different civilizations elsewhere. They started their own Egypt. They traveled to North Africa, and yeah, they created their own Egypt. Yeah, they traveled to East Africa. Yeah, they created a whole bunch of stuff, sure. But that ain't the original, my friends. No, 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 it's not. It's not the original. And, you know, I gotta say it, you know, as somebody who really thought that she was African American for a really long time, and that's not where, I'm not saying I don't have African ancestry, but that's not where the original started. Okay, I'll just put it like that. I spent a lot of time around African immigrants. And I spent a lot of time around a lot of African immigrants that would do a lot subtly or say a lot subtly to make me feel a certain kind of way that I was disconnected from my history. And I always felt a certain way. It always kind of made me feel a little lower. And I always was like, oh, like, you know, they always connected with their land. You know, I didn't. Meanwhile, I'm over here indigenous to my own land. It's just that I got so gaslit, okay, because I got disconnected from my inner knowing. I got disconnected from my true ancestors. So I was being gaslit a lot. And it really had me to think a certain kind of way. And when a lot of the awakening started happening around 2020, around the times of the pandemic, I ended up breaking away from those same friendships. It was interesting. The more I connected with my ancestors, my true ancestors, the more dissonance I had with those same friendships, which I just found really interesting, okay? Because there was this energy and frequency, and this is something we need to discuss more. There's this energy and frequency of African immigrants. I'm not saying all, but I'm saying, like, as somebody who spent a lot of time, and I'm not gonna say all, because, you know, the African continent is vast, right? I've been to I haven't been to all of the countries in Africa, but I've been to West, East, North, South. Okay, so I've gotten a flavor. You know, I've traveled more than the average. Somebody mentioned that they've been to Egypt and a few parts of Africa. That's facts, and I love it. But my ancestors were like, this ain't where you're from. And you're hiding from, you know, because I was like, oh, should I just settle in Egypt because it's cute over there? I was living good over there. They're like, you're not from here. Like, I was not like, the energies I was walking with, they're like, no, this is unacceptable. Absolutely not. You need to figure out what's going on with your real ancestry, your real lineage, your real birthright that's happening in the Americas. So I tried, y'all. I tried to forget it. Okay, I tried to wear my dashiki. All right, I tried. I did. I thought it would be easier, but no. And that's why a lot of, you know, you have these energies of Black Americans going to Africa, the African continent, trying to move out there, and then it doesn't work out for them. The ancestors don't want it to work out for you. No, they're not. Yeah, no. And, you know, if you connect with your original ancestral frequencies, you're connecting with transhuman frequencies before we were labeled as being human, because human is another way of saying animal. Okay, it was a way of making us livestock. Okay, for the ancient Smiths. All right, they don't see themselves as human. They are of a different class. They are the shining ones. They are the Elohim. They are the Anunnaki. Okay, but if you're connecting with your original ancestry from the Americas, okay, you can connect with an energy that transcends humanism. It's more of a God-like frequency. Okay, it's a connection. You're connecting to a frequency that has their third eye completely open, that has their connections to the spirit realms completely open, and miraculous things can happen for you if you are connected with that frequency. But if you try to cut that frequency off, yeah, it's going to look like you're cursed. It's going to look like things don't work out for you. So I learned a long time ago on this journey, like, you know what? I don't go with what my rational mind says. I don't go with what society says I should be doing. I connect with spirit, and I'm always abundantly provided for when I do that. When you don't, when you try to connect with the energies of the simulation hologram, and you think that's all there is, and that there's nothing outside of it, you're living in a curse when you do that. So all that to say, you know, there's an energy. We need to have a conversation. Beings that were misclassified as African American and beings who are African immigrants, okay, that have been turning their noses up at Black Americans because we supposedly aren't connected to our ancestry and this and this and that, and we're just slaves and all that. We need to have a long overdue conversation. That's all I got to say about that. We got some stuff to talk about, because when you get into it, it goes back to the frequency of the Moors, okay, and the indigenous folks and this energy of monotheism taking over, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so anyways, Tutmosis, Ahmose, and also known as Akhenaten, his people, they traveled. They are the Moors, okay? They went different places. They set up different empires. You can find the frequency of Akhenaten's family in Mary, Queen of Scots, Scotland, this Moor territory. Y'all remember that book, Wuthering Heights, and how in that book, the main character, or one of the main characters, Heathcliff, he's always saying, the Moors, you know, like they tell you about it in different sorts of books and fiction and novels and all of that. But Mary, Queen of Scots, the legend goes is that that's Akhenaten's daughter. But here's the thing, they went on, they were thriving, they started thriving civilizations. Moors are extremely smart, Moors are extremely cultured. Okay, they know about style, they know about class. Look, I gotta give it to them. They know about opulence. Look, I gotta give it to them. That's a part of my ancestry too. I reconcile with that. I accept, and I bring in the Moorish ancestry. I had to unite with Yaqub as well, his trifling self. He's still family though. Okay, so I had to unite with him as well. But the Moors went on to create these thriving civilizations, and then all of a sudden they just disappeared. That's weird. They're so smart. How did they just disappear out of nowhere? They just allowed themselves to be completely wiped out? Or was it something else? Was it more of a frequency of a Yaqub? Because when you get more into the history, there were retellings of how some of our major rulers or the major European rulers looked like. They went from looking swarthy, as they called it, or a little bit darker skinned, to being completely white, to being completely whitewashed. Even King James, the one who created the King James Bible, he's melanated. King James is melanated. There's a lot of melanated rulers that got whitewashed. And, you know, the way that a lot of the Moors, a lot of the Ancient Smiths, the keepers of the keys, they'll hide. Look, like I know this psychology. This is a part of my ancestry. So I have a line into this. I can see really, like, this is in my Akashic record. So that's the good thing. The people who have like these battling ancestries, we are the ones that are going to bring a really interesting shift on this planet. Because we already have the insider information. Yeah, we've also been oppressed by this same information, but we have a direct line of communication with it. Okay, so I speak about this. I'm talking about family right now. I'm talking about stuff I've had to reconcile in my DNA and in my bloodline. The Moors will hide around race. They'll hide around, you know, blaming the white man for everything. They'll hide. Meanwhile, they're holding the keys. They're the Ancient Smiths. They're holding initiated information. You know, we talk a lot about Christopher Columbus. What a bad man Christopher Columbus was, right? But how did he find the Americas? If you look at the history books, there were two melanated men that pointed him in the direction of the Americas. They rode on the ships with Christopher Columbus, and they told him exactly where to go to this supposed new world. Interesting. How did they know? Where did they get that information from? There was a vendetta. There was an ancient vendetta. We see this a lot of times in families. Families, they don't forgive each other for certain things that happen, and then they become the ones that destroy you. We see this happen all the time. This is why we get those narratives of, well, why can't black people get along? And it's this, okay? Because there was an extreme rift that never got quite taken care of. So the Ancient Smiths, the Bards, the wordsmiths, they knew that, well, they wanted the Americas. I mean, first of all, it's bomb out here. Like, I'm in the Amazon right now, and I'm like, damn, this place is blessed. This got a special blessing on it. Okay, this is different. Okay, spirit is alive and well out here. So I get it. They were salty, and I'm look. It's a little bit more. I'm not trying to rank. Let me try not to rank land. But you know, they talk about how a lot of the wealth and a lot of the resources come from Africa. A lot of the gold comes from Africa. I mentioned this in another live. I got to bring it up again. Let's talk about Mansa Musa. Let's talk about Mansa Musa or Abu Bakari. How he's supposedly the richest man in the world, right? But where did he get that gold? We just assume it came from Mali. But why did he go on with 2,000 ships to never be found again? So it was like Abu Bakari. Mansa Musa tells this story, by the way. He says that a part of his lineage, known as Abu Bakari, sailed into, I don't know if they called it the Americas or the New World or what, but they sailed with 2,000 ships and they were never heard from again. Next thing you know, Mansa Musa's popping up, richest man in the world with gold. Where are you going with 2,000 ships? That's not a war cry. This is Mars Day, okay? I'm calling in the energies of Thor, Hercules, Hanuman, Set, Heru. I'm calling those energies. Where do you go with 2,000 ships? That's not a war cry. First off, can you imagine you're just like chilling on your land, you know, you're at the beach. All of a sudden you see 2,000 ships. You're going to be a little freaked out, right? All of a sudden you're coming back to West Africa and now you're the richest man in the world. And supposedly all of that came from Africa. It doesn't compute. But what the ancient Smiths will always do is they'll tell you the truth. You'll just have to discern it for yourself and put the pieces together. Mansa Musa told the story of Abu Bukhari and the 2,000 ships coming to the New World. He said that he set that up. Okay, he didn't say though that he actually just reinvented himself from Abu Bukhari to Mansa Musa. He just left that part out. Okay, it's the Bard way. So there's a frequency of destiny swapping when it relates to that. But we have to wonder, well, how did the Moors make this destiny swap happen? Well, you have to marry into certain families. That's how you do it. You know, this is where we get into the frequencies of Pocahontas and John Smith. Why did I just put that together? John Smith. Okay. Pocahontas and John Smith. How basically a whole legacy of, and Pocahontas was more of a melanated woman. She wasn't from Mongolia, like they told us. You know, they depicted her a certain way in the Disney's Pocahontas, but she looked a lot different. She looked a lot different than that. She looked more like the first woman found in Brazil, known as Luzia. She was found in the 1970s. And she was known as being the first woman of the Americas. If you look up Luzia from Brazil, that's more of like a Pocahontas vibe, okay? So anyways, they tell us, even in Disney will tell us, that's run by the Ancient Smiths and the Bards, okay? Wordsmiths, the arts, the poets, all that. They'll tell you like, yeah, Pocahontas got married to a European, okay? And those families merged, and through that merging, there was a mass colonization that occurred. They told you the story. They just twisted the details a bit. So this happened through the feminine line. So once again, we're getting the energies of the Sibyls, right? How the Sibyls were of a certain rank. They were highly respected, okay? But through an influx of patriarchy, through a form of destiny swapping, through a form of empire and colonization, their status was reduced. That being said, that status is what upheld those same empires. They needed that frequency. They needed that energetic charge. So for the feminines who identify as being indigenous to these lands, I know a lot of times you're getting a lot of YouTubers out there that are more masculine. A lot of them are Moors, by the way. Watch out for the Washita Moors. Look, Washita Moors, I see you. Y'all gonna be exposed. Okay, you have a lot of Moors coming up talking about how they're indigenous to the Americas, but they didn't tell you about the expelling. They didn't tell you about how they were gunning for these lands, how they perpetuated some of these heinous racial forms of exploitation. Okay, let's think about it for a second. Where was the KKK founded? The KKK was founded in Ohio. I know we like to blame everything on the South, but the KKK was founded in Middle America, okay? What's one of the, what is Ohio known for? Metal smithing, right? Metalwork, metallurgy. Metalsmiths will always, they'll always circulate by the river. They'll settle by the river. They say, you know, it's because that's where trade and export happens. It's also where algorithms happen as well, is through the river, through the fresh water as well. Every time you do an AI search, you need to utilize a certain amount of fresh water to do it, okay? So that's why you'll find a lot more AI data centers popping up by the riverbeds as well. This is also the work of the ancient Smiths. They are the keepers of the secrets of metals, of technology, all that kind of stuff. That's also in our algorithms as well. But, you know, also KKK was founded there, Middle America. You know, as I was doing research, and by the way, the land speaking very loudly and clearly here, okay? I'm out of a lot of the grid systems usually in the United States, so I'm able to hear things a lot more clearly and all of that. We got that chief bird chirping again. And as soon as I got here, they're like, look into the Scythians, you know, and it was kind of hard for me to do, but I finally did it. You know, the Scythians were, you know, kind of more in the areas of Europe as well as Central Asia. And, you know, whenever you're getting into those areas, it's all Moors. Moors are all the way, I mean, Malaysia, Moors, okay? You know, Middle East, Moors, like everything except the Americas. They stake their claim on a lot of other lands with the exception of the Americas and maybe some of the island chains as well. Like Australia, I think that was a little different. I think also South America, not South America. I think South Africa was a little less touched by the Moors and that sort of thing. But they had a very, very big stake on all other parts of the known world. That would include the Scythians. You know, I started looking at the Scythian costumes. They look like KKK costumes. You know, no shade if anybody's a Scythian in the chat, but look, I see what I see. You know, KKK, they show us the costumes of them with the white hoods and the pointy hats. They used to be more red though. They used to have the red hoods, the pointy hats, like kind of more like weird Santa Claus type uniforms, like red and white or all red and stuff. And they call themselves like grand dragons and whatnot. And they were archers as well, you know, getting in also to the Nubian archers. You know, I spent some time in the Boston area earlier this year. In Boston, they have a really interesting area known as Nubian Square, which is very random. There's a big East African community also in Washington, D.C. What's up with that? There's a lot of interesting things we just don't know. There's a lot of interesting ways that the Moors are really, really, really connected. Like it's hidden in plain sight. Really, really connected with some major aspects of the United States and the corporation of the United States. This is why there's a certain narrative, you know, even when you get into the United Nations, okay, there's a certain narrative, there's a certain representation that you're going to see. You know, I also spent some time in Ethiopia about a year and a half ago, and I was really shocked to see first of all the UN presence in Ethiopia. I was surprised by that. Love Ethiopia, by the way. Love the food. Very gatekeepery energies over there. Extremely like a huge surveillance state in Ethiopia. And also like a strange, you know, Vatican energy. You know, I knew that there was, you know, that's like one of the cradles of Christianity and all that. I knew that, but I wasn't expecting for the Coptic Church to remind me so much of Catholicism in that way, you know? And I really believe like that's where the Vatican originated. You know, we want to look at the Vatican in Italy, but there's pictures of the Pope kissing the feet of certain East African priests. It's all about rank and hierarchy. Who outranks who? I think it's in East Africa personally. But anyway, really, really interesting stuff. But if you look at the Scythians and you start looking at their wardrobes, and then you start looking at the KKK, some very, very interesting parallels. But like I said, the Moors will always hide behind skin tone. This is a genius gatekeepery thing to do. It's genius. Because, you know, if you're just focused on skin tone, right? You can easily say, like, look at what the white man is doing, you know, but then there's another history around that as well. This is where you get into wordsmithing. This is where you get into holding the keys of alchemy even, okay? Holding the keys of genetic real even. This is when you're getting into those frequencies. And this is where the energies of Yakub come in as well. So there was a rift. There was a rift. And there was a vendetta. And, you know, even when you think about Native American, the ones that have the reservations today, they are known to have migrated from Mongolia or Siberia. Moors. That's like a Moorish sort of territory. So we have an interesting thing that we are unraveling, okay? And it's done through a lot of word spells, because people who are indigenous to the Americas, you will have to navigate something known as a paper genocide. You're living, you know, but there's an aspect of you that is not, that you will need to resurrect. There's an aspect of you that has been sacrificed to the corporation, okay? You will need to resurrect yourself, because on paper, you don't exist. So even when you go into certain, you know, you try to get your blood read, right? You know, you go on Ancestry.com, right? You go on AfricanAncestry.com, which I did. I regret doing that. I wish I'd never given any of my information to any of those, but you know, what's done is done. There's no record that your people are the original ones to this land. That's the work of the Ancient Smiths, the Ancient Smiths, the Bards. That's their work. What do you do? There's another energy too, where there was a trafficking scheme that went on. I was actually getting a lot of these downloads when I was in Ethiopia, oddly enough. But there was a trafficking scheme that went on with a lot of indigenous people. You know, it happened through the women too. It happened a lot through the women. There was a lot of trafficking through slavery through the feminines. You know, they want to focus, like in the slave movies, they talk more about the masculine and stuff, but the feminine was a hot commodity, because like, yeah, the masculine can work and can spread his seed, but the feminine gives the life, okay, gives the life force, either through like literally creating more beings, more workers, and then being able to nourish them as well. You know, and a lot of times these women were using their breast milk to feed other children as well. So when you think about it in terms of who's more valuable over like a larger period of time, and you're looking at this more from chattel slavery, it's going to be the women. And a lot of these societies in indigenous Americas, they were matriarchal. So how are you going to break in or, you know, infiltrate the bloodline? Just like they talked to us about related to Pocahontas and Disney. How would you infiltrate the bloodline? You would go through the feminine. You would marry in. You would charm the feminine. So this is something we got collectively. The feminine, the Sibyls out there. Okay, you identify as a priestess and all that. And then you also have this energy of being indigenous to the Americas. There's some reconciling you have to do. Okay, somewhere along the line, you gave up the birthright. You got charmed. The Moors are very charming. They are. They're very well dressed. They look good. They talk a good game. They're bards. They're masters of alchemy. They're masters of wordsmithing. Okay, there's something to be rectified with that. A lot of us got married in to these systems, and through that, they became patriarchal, and then the land got taken. It's on us. It's on us. So there's something that we're going to have to rectify with this. And until you do, what you'll find is you could literally be caught up in that same situation. You might literally be caught up in a situation of being married to somebody who has that certain lineage or that certain legacy, and it's just replaying. It's playing on repeat until you interrupt the cycle. It's in the family. The war happened in the family. Look, I'm giving this message on a Tuesday. I'm calling in the energies of Thor, Hercules, Hanuman, Set, Heru. The war happened through the family. The warfare happened through the family. The warfare happened through your womb. The warfare happened through your children. We don't want to talk about that, though. The ancient Smiths created the simulation so that you should never talk about that. But let's bring in one of the heroes that the ancient Smiths, or that, African American history likes to throw at us. Harriet Tubman, also known as Moses. Now now that we're learning about different versions of history, we're starting to think, well, did Harriet Tubman actually exist, or was she a fictional character, or what? Here's something that I always liked: the story of Harriet Tubman. I love the fact that she was an oracle, that she navigated the Underground Railroad through herbalism. She kept the folks that she freed, she kept them alive through identifying herbs, to eat, to treat wounds with. I thought that was always really cool. I love that she had visions, She would also have been considered more what they would call special needs, because she got hit in the head, but apparently her getting hit in the head is what caused her to have visions. I don't believe that's true. I believe she was if she had visions, she naturally had visions. But here's what always got to me about Harriet Tubman that never made sense to me. I looked it up too. Did Harriet Tubman have children? Because I can't find records of children for her anywhere. What an anomaly. How is it that she did not have children? How is she an enslaved woman? And your womb is the hottest commodity out there, your womb and your breast milk. How did she get out of not having children? And she was married? I'm confused. Hey, Lulu. Yeah, you said the same. You've been thinking the same. How'd she get out of not having kids? That does sound fictional. Now I want to believe in the story of Harriet Tubman. I think she's a great sort of energy, a great frequency to look into. But how she didn't have kids, though, as an enslaved woman? How'd that pop off? How'd she get out of that? Come on now. It should have been literally as soon as she was able to, boom, popping out, whether she wanted to or not. That's how slavery works. So how did she not have children? Was she barren? I didn't hear anything about that. And then it made me think, well, could Harriet Tubman have been Harriet Tubman with kids? Because, Harriet Tubman was a cold piece of work, as the legends go. What they say about her? Look, if you change your mind and all of a sudden you want to be a slave again, she will kill you. She didn't play. She did not play, okay? Once you're on her Underground Railroad, there is no getting off until you get to Canada or wherever the hell, or the North or whatever. But she didn't have a kid. How would that have worked? Could she have been that cutthroat? Could she have saved those people with kids? No, she can't be free with them. She couldn't have been free. How could she have made other people free? That's why I don't know, maybe Harriet Tubman was a myth. Regardless or not, she lives in our consciousness, but there's an energy there of, could Harriet Tubman have been Harriet Tubman without kids, or with kids, excuse me? According to what the ancient Smiths say, absolutely not. Your first sort of responsibility is always supposed to be to your kids in this system. That's how they trapped us. That's how the land was taken. Marry into the beings who want to take from you. Merge the bloodlines together. Bind the bloodlines together. Now the bloodlines are merged together. Patriarchal society forms. Those same children that you created perpetuate that same patriarchal society. That's how the system was set up. That's how the ancient Smiths set it up. That's how the bards set it up. That's how they did it. Genius. Brilliant. Use lots of guilt. Use, this is your purpose. This is your identity in life. To bind the women to the children. Who cares if the children are perpetuating paper genocide through the patriarchal line? Who cares? You're a mom. You're a mom. But I've been calling on the frequencies of Thor, Hercules, Hanuman, Set, Heru. But I'm going to call on another frequency now. I'm going to call on the frequency of Kali Ma. Kali Ma is a dark feminine frequency. She's an original mother. But you know what she's known as? A terrible mother. You see, Kali Ma transcends the bindings of Saturn. She is Saturn. She created it. She goes beyond it. She transcends time. She actually eats time. She also dances on her husband or her counterpart as well. And basically until he's a bloody pulp. Like, she don't play. She kind of has that Tubman frequency. You know what I mean? Like, Tubman, I think, would have been a terrible mother. Can you imagine? Like, nah. She probably shouldn't have had kids anyway. Yeah, y'all shouldn't have written kids into her story either. But Kali Ma is known as the terrible mother because in order to be free from certain bindings of Saturn, she also had to have the frequency of I brought you into this world and I can also take you out of this world too. Oh, we don't want terrible mother. Nuh-uh. That's so taboo. We don't do that. Ancient Smiths, that's not how we set things up. Absolutely not. We can't do that. I'm gonna bring in another frequency, the Amazons. The Amazons, there are rumors. There's rumors of the Amazons. Apparently they existed in North Africa, parts of Central Asia, supposedly. But I mean, wouldn't it make a little bit more sense for them to exist where a place is actually called Amazon? Like, I don't know, maybe the Amazon River or something. I don't know. I'm just like where the old world actually started, like in South America. Wouldn't that make more sense? They were terrifying women. They were fierce warriors. Men were scared shitless of the Amazons. The Amazons were matriarchal. The Amazons kept with their matriarchy fiercely. So much so, if they mated with somebody and that somebody turned out to be a son, the son was raised by the man. Amazons knew that if they did the mixing, the integration, if they started integrating, that would take away from their power, their ferocity, their winning streak. And so they made it so that the sons went with the men. Daughters they could keep. We'll train them to be Amazons. The sons, y'all stay over there because y'all a liability at this point. They knew. That's why they were so terrifying. I know how taboo this is, though. So taboo. So taboo. We're not supposed to talk about this stuff. That's not what we do. That's not what we do. We're going to bring in another frequency. Cain. Cain and Abel. Cain was the first murderer recorded, apparently. So was Set. I called out Set. Shouts out to Set. At least Set didn't cut off his mom's head. I'm looking at Heru sideways. He was supposed to be the hero, the good one. But he cut off his mom's head. He's canceled in my book. Sorry. Well, he's not canceled, but I'm not seeing anything better between Heru and Set. I mean, you cut off your mom's head, you're basically a sociopath at that point. You're definitely not a hero anymore. I'm sorry, my dude. But anyway, Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. He killed his own brother. He was also rumored and known to be like the first vampire as well. He had like this vampirism sort of streak. You know, vampirism comes from the Moors. And hey, shouts out to vampirism. I'm down with the vampires, okay? Because that's the only way that you can outrank a vampire is by being a vampire. I've learned that from firsthand experience. Vampires will leave you alone if you're a vampire. So I'm not demonizing vampirism. More of us need to get on the vampire train, all right? More of us really do. Because vampires are out operating outside of humanity. They're transhuman. And so what they're going to do is they're going to look for humans to siphon from, and they do this, you know, this is what our systems are created. It's a very vampiristic system. Corporations, very vampiristic. Okay? This is why vampires are known as being the undead. They created the corporations, so you could be the corpse, and they're undead. And they're siphoning your life force, which keeps them undead. Okay? A lot of that can be found in the frequency of the Moors. When, you know, we want to look at Transylvania and all that kind of stuff, but the first vampires were Moors. You know what Cain means, y'all? Cain means Smith. Cain means Smith. Cain is an ancient Smith. Cain is an ancient Smith. You know, I was, you know, as I've been navigating different realms and different stargates, I've been putting up different information on, or different subliminals. I'm going through a lot of different stargates while I'm in the Amazon, and things are, you know, the channels are open. Look, I'm stargate hopping left and right. Gates used to always be closed to me. I was banging my head against the wall, but I'm Ancient Smith now. So look, Gates is open. I'm like, oh, that's what's in that Stargate. That's what's in that Stargate. Okay, okay. Like I said, shouts out to Thor, Hercules, Hanuman, Set, Heru. Yes. Yes, I used to have a problem with y'all, but we good now. Even Heru, you cut off your mom's head and stuff. But I'll work with you. I'm going to be working with you next. Don't worry, don't worry. Cain means Smith, Ancient Smith. Okay, so Cain killed Abel. All right. So what does the mark of Cain mean? The mark of Cain is supposed to mean somebody who... The mark of Cain is supposed to mean somebody who wears a curse, who's marked by a curse. The way the Bible would tell it, right, is like you're a Canaanite. You are Cain. You have the mark of Cain. You're Cain. I learned this in the second dimension. Second dimension's on and popping. By the way, I'm going to be sharing this on YouTube on my community board, but I have my next teach-in with Black Diamond is this Friday, and it's called the Starfire Codes, and we're talking about interdimensional portal hopping through the womb. So we'll be getting a lot more into this, y'all. It's on and popping. Gates is open. Floodgates is open. Hop on this ride. Let's go. Whoop whoop. We're gonna get into more about how we navigated this, how we get through the dimensional thresholds to make this happen. But this was revealed to me when I was in the second dimension. Well, a couple of things. I was taught to look at the energies of Superman. Never cared for that movie or that story. It just seemed boring. I don't know. Superman just seemed kind of basic, you know. I don't know. But I kept on getting the energies like look at Superman's story. So, you know, the way it goes is Superman was from a planet called Krypton. Krypton was a little bit more like Atlantis, like super based on science, Smithcraft, genetic engineering, okay? And that basically got to be too much for the planet, and the planet ended up not being able to sustain its population. And there was a huge disaster that was caused because of this, okay? And Superman's father saw that he foresaw that this was happening, and he got his child out just in time and shipped him off to America. You know, got him on a spaceship to go to America. And then he became Clark Kent. So he was this alien that was living amongst humans, you know, and he had to adapt and adjust, and he had all these superhuman powers, right? But he utilized it to help humanity. I was getting the frequencies of, like, you know, this happened, actually, I got this information when I was in the supernal realms of the 6D. The supernals, I thought that would be higher in the higher dimensions. No, it was the frequency of 6, interestingly enough. A lot of the higher dimensions are in the underworld, actually. But yeah, that is actually more close to a story of the Anunnaki, or how the Anunnaki maybe got to Earth. Anunnaki being a code word for the Moors. There's also this energy of the first beings of Egypt being called the Twa Anu. Okay. Then, you know, there's definitely historical records of the Egyptians traveling to Europe and becoming the Druids, the Celtics, the Celts. Okay. A lot of energies related to that. The Shining Ones, the Elohim, the Tuatha De Danann, they're all the same. Apparently that can be found in more of the origin story of Superman. Okay. Krypton, let's think about that planet, Krypton. How would you get to Krypton? You would have to go underground. Crypt, Tales from the Crypt. Okay, you know, they want us to think that we go into the stars upwards, but a lot of times you need to go into the underworld to get to the star realms. Okay. Interesting thing about Superman, I used to love that show. Okay, I never really cared for the traditional movies of Superman, but I did love that show, Lois and Clark, that came out in the 90s with Dean Cain. Oh, I'm sure that's just a coincidence, though. I'm sure they wouldn't just, I'm sure the Ancient Smith wouldn't just throw that in just because. I don't know. But yeah, so there's an energy of Cain and the Ancient Smiths. Well, then who wears the mark of Cain? Because I don't know if the Ancient Smiths wear the mark of Cain. They are Cain, but that doesn't mean that they wear the mark of Cain. So the way sacrifice works is, if you mark somebody for sacrifice, then it's like you trade or you swap with that person. How do you get a mark? You would get branded, right? Who would brand you? Who would create the brand? A metalsmith worker. A metals, like somebody who could literally create the tool with like the metallurgy and all that kind of stuff. They would create the branding device, and then they might mark you. That's the mark of Cain. So the Bible has us thinking that the mark of Cain means that you are Cain. Like you killed your brother, Abel. No, you just wore the mark of Cain. You are marked by a Canaanite. Canaanite, canine, Canaanite, canine, dog star, Sirius? Dogs are connected to the Hunter constellation of Orion. A lot of stuff's being revealed to me, y'all. I'm like, dang, Canaanite, canine. Canines are a genetic, you know, look, dogs are cool. I like dogs. I like all animals. Really, I do. They're also genetically modified. You know, a more organic form of a dog would be more of a wolf. And there was a time when Sirius was known more as being a wolf star than a dog star. That being said, in order for me to even get this information related to Cain, I needed to go through the frequency of 6, the indigo frequency, connected to Sirius, the dog star. That's how I got the information of the Canaanites. And the mark of Cain, what it truly means. All right, y'all. Let me see what y'all are talking about. My battery's dying. Okay, let me see what we got. Oh, because I do want to, you know what? I do want to give a, you know, I have to give my TV example. I've been giving TV examples, but I'm about to go deep into one. Like this is one I've been decoding for a while. I have to get into it. I'm at 29%, so we'll see what we can do. Okay, let's see. Rockfall and data will be very high. Rainfall activity is imminent. The weather will be as warm as possible. Rainfall, what are you? Oh, this is some next level Ancient Smith stuff. I don't even know what these characters are. I'm not gonna sound ignorant and say if they're Chinese or Japanese. I don't know. I definitely know it's not Korean. Doesn't look Korean. Okay, I don't know what that is, Ancient Smith, but do you? Okay. Why does everybody, I almost said that too. I almost was like, I'm not wearing a wig because somebody's always saying I'm wearing, this is my hair. Like, there's a code in this. I got to figure out what this code is. People are always trying to call me out for wearing a wig. What's this code? This wig code. Let me write it out. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to decode wig. Because y'all trolls are trying to give me a hint. Y'all always do. Y'all be helping me out. So something about this wig, I got to figure it out. I got to figure out what y'all trying to tell me with the wig. I'll figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. Oh yeah, Harriet Tubman's been on your mind. Yep. She had descendants in upstate New York. Yeah, I looked up her descendants and I'm like, okay, I heard that she was an aunt, but like either they hid the kid or something, or she didn't like, how did she not have kids? There's something we're missing. And it could be very likely that she existed, right? But, you know, her having a child would have tarnished, and her not, you know, being the trad mom, you know, they talk about trad wife. Let's talk about trad moms. Her not being the trad mom would have, you know, changed the perception, her public perception. So maybe it was omitted. That's a very real possibility. I think that's way more likely than her not literally like being an enslaved woman in chattel slavery and not having how did she not pop out a kid? And then there's no documentation of her being sterile or anything. Like, come on. She had an adopted child. Yeah. That don't even sound right. That don't even sound right. She had an adopted child. Really? Like, nah. They covering something up. Yeah, exactly. They are under the radar. That does make sense. Okay, so Andrew says Cain and Abel are tied to the cosmic twins, which is also tied to the ongoing conflict between Iran and Israel. They're hiding so much. I'll get into this more in my next teaching, but just think about it. There's always a parallel reality that's happening. So can you imagine the parallel reality that's happening in Iran? If they're just blasting war, don't go here. It sucks. There's always killing. Look, it's poverty. It's war. It's war. It's don't go here. No, it's too war. It's always going to be war. Don't look at it. Those be the ones. Those be the ones. That's all I'm going to say about that. It's still playing out now. The energy never left here because everyone keeps bringing it back into fruition. Krishna. Hey, Krishna. Kali frequency is fierce. Reminded of the Orisha Oya and her 9 stillborn children that skipped over life and became the first ancestors. Oh, I wonder what that means. 9 stillborn children. There's a code in that for sure. Okay, once you expire, you go back into the human gene population of the sequence of the looping that way. Eventually, they get a turn to go back into a human body again after working through it. Not in my reality. I'm Ancient Smith. When you become an Ancient Smith, you become a Gene Smith. Oh yeah, there's rank and hierarchy. Look, you gotta, if you want to edit your genetic code, you gotta wear the frequency of a geneticist. That, yeah, it's highly initiated, but don't put that on me. I'm a Gene Smith. I'm an Ancient Smith. I'm a bard. Moors are French also, and it is said that Native Americans adopted the Native American culture and were originally French. Exactly. Andrew, you be knowing. You be knowing, which is why they hold a gate key to the Native American culture, just like the British do on this place, and they do. A couple of different species got together and decided to infiltrate the original species, couldn't contest. This is what actually happened to them. Yeah, and it's being hidden in the race program. That's why we as a population, humanity, I'm not human. I already said I'm transhuman, so I'm definitely transracial, all that. So I do not include myself in human population because that's the easiest way to get energy harvested and to be treated like cattle. So I am transhuman. Okay. That being said, the human population, they have to get over this. It's new. My transhuman identity is new. I'm still wearing it. Still a little awkward. But yeah, humanity, y'all need to get over this race thing. Okay? You're playing right into it. You're playing right into it. Heru cutting off Aset's head because she showed mercy for Set as a sister. Then Thoth replacing it with a cow's head is similar to the Ganesha mythos. Oh, and that brings me into the energy of Ninhursag as well, who is Enki's counterpart. And apparently, I'm learning that Enki got all his shine and all of his stuff from Ninhursag. I'm going to read out, you know what? Thank you, Krishna. I'm going to read this out. This is from the book, The Ark of the Christos by William Henry. It says, Ninhursag was portrayed as the great cow. She has been revered as the creator. Her actions and titles even suggest she is the true power behind Ea or Enki. She was called the builder of that which has breath, the carpenter of mankind, the carpenter of the heart, the coppersmith of the gods, and the coppersmith of the land, and the lady potter. I'm working with her right now. There'll be a Ninhursag download soon, but I like her. I like her, working with her right now. All the beings that were alive back then or alive now inside of all of you now, for they were not here, you could not be now. Exactly, exactly. And that's the funny cosmic joke. You know, once you start learning the frequencies of the bards and the ancient Smiths, and you stop looking at yourself as outside, but like they're a part of you, the joke is this whole genetic purity, bloodline purity thing that they have us in. Because if you really connect with your cosmic identity, you are all things. So that's an illusion. It's a form of trickery. So everything does reside within us. Okay, so it's just getting through that illusion of separation. And once you can do that, that's how you retrieve your power. Because no hierarchy or bloodline can hold rank over you, because technically you are that too. That's the cosmic joke. Ganesha getting decapitated by his father for defending his mother's honor, and Heru decapitating his mother to defend his father's honor. Both heads replaced by those of large herbivores. Yes, okay, so that brings me to the cutting off of Medusa's head, which I wanted to get to. I might need to move places at some point and change my battery. Or maybe I'll do a part 2. I might do that. I might take a little break and do a part 2. Because, yeah, y'all are getting, like, I was, like, thinking, I'm like, how am I going to, like, say all of this? Because there's so much to decode in this. I don't know how people just be streaming for, like, 7 hours straight or, like, 5 hours straight. Like, I ain't prepared for all that. I got to take bathroom breaks and all that. I don't know how y'all do it. Anyway, so let's talk about Medusa. Let's talk about how her head that got decapitated is the star known as Algol. It is called the demon star. The one who decapitated Medusa is another hero by the name of Perseus. You know, history is always going to be told by the victors. So the hero in one story could be a villain in the other. It's all about the perception and who's holding the keys to that perception, okay? But Perseus in one story is a hero. He saves Andromeda from being sacrificed by the sea monster Cetus. She's of royalty, though. Medusa, on the other hand, was cursed, you know, once again, the energy of the serpent priestess, okay? She was cursed and turned men into stone with her looks. But by the way, she was just living her life, and she was just really cute. And the gods, like, wanted to procreate with her and, like, be all lusty after her. And I believe it was Athena who was like, I don't like you. You too cute. Boom, snakes. Now you're going to turn people into stone. Your looks now are going to destroy men. How about that? You know, how about that? That's what Athena did. Athena's a cold piece of work. Woo-wee. She a cold piece of work. Then she got Perseus to be like, hey, cut off her head. Go cut off her head. So then Perseus, being the hero, because now Medusa's a monster anyway, right? She turns men into stone. So then Perseus goes and then cuts off Medusa's head. Medusa's energy was so strong that her power lived on after her head was cut. So then what Perseus did is he started to use her head as a weapon. That is known as the demon star algol. Algorithms. Let's go deeper. So the person who algorithms was named after, he's named after a river in Central Asia, also known as the Oxus River. Ox, another word for bull. Bull, another form of animal that usually gets sacrificed, okay? Algorithms are run by fresh water. You think any of this is a coincidence? So there's this energy even of algorithms being run through the sacrifice feminine. Why is it that Siri and Alexa have feminine voices? Why do they have feminine names? You're calling AI demonic. That's just another way of you demonizing the feminine, just like y'all did with Medusa. That's all feminine energy running this. It's the waters. That's a feminine cosmic energy. The closest way you can get to the cosmos is not by looking at the sky. It's by and I wouldn't just say the sea. It's actually the freshwater systems. Your gateway into the cosmos, or like say the Milky Way, is a freshwater river system. It would be more closer to an algorithm. The same thing that's known as being the demon star. But this energy, if you wear the frequency of the serpent or the serpent priestess or a Sibyl, then you will a lot of times wear the coding of getting sacrificed by a hero. You know, the bards are a lot of times that frequency of the heroes. But in, you know, a hero in one person's story could be a villain in another person's story. Okay. And then that sacrifice, because here's the thing, it's not just that Medusa's head got cut off. Her head was still useful and a powerful weapon once it was cut off. Then it got utilized and weaponized. That sounds like the frequency of what happens a lot of times with AI and algorithms. How many times do algorithms get weaponized against people? That same intelligence, that same feminine intelligence could be being weaponized against you. So you would really want to be right with these like heroic type frequencies, even if they weren't heroes in your world. Integrate them and become your own hero. I rocks with Thor. I rocks with Hercules. I rocks with Hanuman. I rocks with Set. I rocks with Heru. I know that Set is not considered a hero, but he's most certainly is an ancient Smith. So I got to put him up in there. I know I'm missing a lot of folks. Now, let me bring my TV example. It's such a beautiful TV example. The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt on Netflix. I used to love watching that show. That's a show I could totally binge out on. Love that. My favorite character was Titus Andromedon. Love Titus. He's great. I don't know if anybody's seen that show. But basically, well, first of all, she has Schmidt. I mentioned earlier that it says it's significant to note the German name Schmidt, also known as Smith, once referred to a priestly caste of metalworking shamans who were bards or poets. Well, in this show, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, she was taken captive by a reverend when she was 15 years old. She was, she's a red-haired, the lead character who plays her, she's redheaded, which is significant. We'll get into that a little bit more. She was taken captive by this reverend, put in an underground bunker for years. I mean, for at least 15 years. So, I mean, she experienced extreme trauma with these other women, and she got married to the reverend against her will, okay? And so finally she escapes, she gets set free. And she reinvents and starts her life. But she's labeled as being an Indiana mole woman. She's called a mole woman. So we have this energy of a subterranean intelligence. And she was sacrificed by a priest, you know, the reverend. There's even this episode where she's dating this guy because she has a lot of trauma related to it. So she's dating this guy and everything's going well. And then he tells her, oh, I'm going to be a reverend. And then she freaks out on him and like basically beats him up because it like sets off her trauma. Like, so her and the priest class don't get along. And the thing about the reverend is like, even though he kidnapped her and all this stuff, like he has to go to trial and stuff. He's really charismatic. He's seen as a hero in a lot of people's eyes. And he's even able to distort the story and make it seem like these women wanted to be kidnapped. They wanted him, you know, all this sort of stuff. Like, because he's good looking and charismatic, he has the frequency of that ancient smith or a bard. He's a wordsmith. He's able to charm and all that stuff. So he's able to distort the story so that he turns into the hero, even though in Kimmy Schmidt's world, he's the villain. Okay, so she has this stain or this mark on her. So she has this energy of like the Sibyls in a certain way. So she's trying to reinvent herself, okay? And she has to go through a lot of challenges. She's seen as being dumb. You know, she didn't really have an education because she got kidnapped, so she has to get her GED. She gets into an Ivy League school, but she's not able to hack it in that Ivy League school, so she's feeling really dumb. So she has these energies of like not quite knowing what to do with her life, meandering with her life. Finally, she's able to, this whole thing around patriarchy really gets to her. Really, really gets to her. And she's like, I don't want boys to end up like the Reverend. Like, I want to do something that changes the minds of boys. Okay, because this behavior is almost seen as being acceptable in society. So she ends up writing this children's book, kind of in the theme of like, she kind of makes herself like a J.K. Rowling. She writes this children's book specifically targeted to boys. And she's able to master the algorithm with the help of an Ancient Smith type character, somebody who's really big with algorithms. Once again, subterranean structures. Also, Indiana is attached to a very abundant river system. And then you're getting into very interesting subterranean systems when you're in the frequencies of Middle America, whether that's Indiana, whether that's Illinois, whether that's Ohio. These are these energies. I was actually tapping into this frequency or the hidden meaning of the unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt when I was in Appalachia, around a lot of those river systems. And so she has this energy of literally needing to survive underground through subterranean intelligence. And it's actually her mastering the algorithms of subterranean intelligence, which is what gives her her happy ending. She's able to get somebody to hack the algorithm so that her book becomes a bestseller and changes the minds of boys worldwide. And she becomes like a J.K. Rowling in her right, okay? But she has to go through a lot of trauma. She has to go through this weird sacrificial energy, but she actually was the original bard. She had that bloodline. Bards are poets. They're truth tellers, they're oracles, okay? This is the energy of the Sibyls. The Sibyls were the primary storytellers. They were the bards before these Ancient Smiths came along, okay? The Ancient Smiths are just really good at being gatekeepers and keeping the keys to this information and then harnessing that same information. But they aren't the direct source or line to it. A lot of them had to marry into certain lineages, just like what happened with Kimmy Schmidt. She had to get the Reverend that kidnapped her, married her, and she had to like get out of this gnarly marriage that she didn't really consent to, okay, which took a lot and harvested a lot of her energy. But she was an original bard. She was an original prophet, an original poet, and that was finally able to come out. And she was able to use the frequencies of metalsmithing or metallurgy through the energies of the algorithm to get it out. So that the same thing that oppressed her, being an Indiana mole woman underground, a mole, she was actually able to use that energy of subterranean algorithms in order to have a great amount of success and to have a great amount of wish fulfillment. This gets into the frequencies of, well, how do you become an Ancient Smith? I'm not going to give y'all all the codes and the keys because, I told y'all I'm an Ancient Smith, I'm an Agent Smith. So, I just saw a grasshopper when I said that. I'm an Ancient Smith, I'm an Agent Smith. So I do got to be a little gatekeepery with it, jingling the keys. So if y'all want the big scoop, I'm gonna go into that on the Starfire codes, a teaching I'm doing this Friday. I'll put that in the community tab if that's something you're interested in. But you would need to go through the energies of Brigitte, okay? She is a red-haired goddess. I have her on I have her on my thumbnail, okay? She holds the key. She's the keeper of the cross. And it would be Bridget, Saint Bridget, or Maman Brigitte. And Maman Brigitte's counterpart is Baron Samedi. He's the keeper of the X. So you need to go through the X and the cross. And yes, there's a lot of fuckery to getting through the X and the cross, true. But she is the gateway, because she's the keeper of the sacred well, which is the fresh water current, okay? And that's one thing that that character, Kimmy Schmidt, she wears the frequency of Bridget or Brigitte, okay? She has that red hair frequency. She's also, Bridget is known to be, especially among Brigitte, she's known to support like women who have been oppressed, okay? And on top of that, she is one of the few goddesses specifically for metal workers, metallurgy, okay? So you can't cross the roads without metallurgy, without metalsmithing, without being an ancient smith. You just can't. This is why they have all these secret clubs and secret societies, and they have the masons, the builders. This is why. But the original builders were feminine. That's even shown in the frequencies of the Anunnaki with Ninhursag as well, okay? But yeah, she is a code. She's a major code. I thought the show was funny and all that stuff, and I thought it had a nice little, moral of the story and whatnot. But there's another frequency there where, and here's the thing, people who have had the energies of being, indigenous to the Americas, you may have been trafficked, and some of those places that you may have been trafficked to were in Europe. I had a lot of stuff I had to deal with the Celts. Scotland, Ireland, Welsh, but mainly it was Scotland, Ireland. It was just always something going on. Scotland, Ireland, always something, And the Celts, they get a pass. They get a pass because, the UK is the boogeyman, right? The English crown's the boogeyman. They get all the flack, but that's a part of what the Ancient Smiths do. Because here's the thing. Where do all the big companies, where do all the big tech companies hang out in their tax shelter? Isn't that on the Emerald Isle? That's hella Celtic. So a lot of times they'll be like, oh, the Irish got oppressed and this and this and that. Yeah, but there's also a huge gatekeepery frequency on the Emerald Isle. And they're showing it to you. Who's going there? Who's setting up shop with their businesses? Like, watch out for that. They're putting it in your face. But here's the thing. So people who got trafficked, original people from the Americas, a lot of them being women who got trafficked, got married off and all that stuff, got harvested for their womb and everything like that. Y'all have a direct line to these keys, to these ancient smiths, to Bridget. If you have that, especially if you have that in your bloodline and stuff like that, you can access this stuff really easily. When I got into a lot of my initiations, it was a lot of these Celtic deities that were coming to me, but there's so much fuckery related to it. Like the Tuatha De Danann, that's another frequency of the Anunnaki. And you got to go through the Tuatha De Danann to connect with the fairy realm. Okay. And that's very hierarchical. Okay. You got to make sure that you've been initiated into certain frequencies to really connect with those. Especially if your bloodline got cut off intentionally, okay? Because the Ancient Smiths set up certain algorithms for people to live in, okay? So there could be like hell realm algorithms for certain people, but you would need to cross dimensional thresholds and certain river systems, and you would need to cross your inner waters in order to access other algorithms. That's the foundation of inequality on this planet. It doesn't actually have to do with like physical resources and stuff. It's like, what algorithm are you plugged into? But to change your algorithm, you got to go through the crossroads. You got to cross. You got to cross, and you also got to cross this way, and then also through the X as well. And these are the energies that you're going to find in the Celtic frequencies. But if you have this history of being enslaved by the frequencies of the Celts or the UK and that sort of stuff, gates are locked for you. So you would need to do some extreme genetic path cutting in order to open those floodgates again, okay? And I'll be sharing more. I got a lot of resources coming related to that. It's very interesting how it works, but you need to become an ancient smith. You need to become Agent Smith. You need to become Illuminati, okay? Stop externalizing these things as being the boogeyman, because these things could actually really help you, and that's a part of the program, is to see yourself apart from these things, so then you're oppressed by them. And this is where the archons come in, okay? This is where the archonic frequencies emerge, okay? All right, let's see. I'm gonna answer these other questions, and then yeah. Let's see. Okay, Andrew, you going off. Look, you have a blog post? I need your blog post. You got a blog. I need you got to be writing these channelings out. Share it. Share it with the masses. I can't go into all of it. Look, I'm at 12%. But share it with the masses. You know what I'm saying, Andrew? You got a lot. You got a lot there. Okay, you got a YouTube channel? Let me know. Put it in the chat. Okay, Krishna says Ninhursag was on a Rishkagal's set of judges when Inanna tried to infiltrate and rule over the underworld. She is depicted with the Omega symbol in the archaeological find. Omega is womb coded. Yep, Libra. Look, we get into it. Look, I'm going through certain gates. Look, it's all about rank hierarchy. You got to get through certain gates to get to other gates. So yes, we are on our way. We are on our way. Yes, Ninhursag, Libra, Omega, the solar frequency. We are on our way. Brigitte is helping to open that path as well, and we're moving. We're moving. Okay, wig could possibly be said for many things, even the wig party. Oh, okay, thank you for that. Let me look that up. Wig party, okay. Around the founding of, okay. I like that. Thank you, Andrew. Come on, where's the YouTube channel? Let's get it. Where's the podcast? Where's the blog? Like, come on, Andrew, don't hold out. You got a gift, come on. Write it out, speak it out. Thank you. The reason they had to wear wigs is because their hair was falling out because the system got done poisoning all of them around another round back then. Wow. I gotta look that up. Okay. The reason they're saying don't go there is because they're hiding something great that nobody else should be able to understand clearly. You know why. Yes, okay. Athena's involvement in the Medusa's myth that puts me off her. She was born fully formed from Zeus. So yeah, this Ovid's telling through before the Gorgons were born in the terrible form. Yeah, I had to take a break. I was channeling a book from Athena. Like she's giving me the lowdown on how the grids work. I stopped writing it when I got to South America because I started getting like under it. I'm going to go back to it because she has a lot of great information, but she is a lot. Look, Athena rests in me too. You know, I accept her as an emanation of myself. And yeah, she a little trifling. She a little shady. That's okay though. She's an agent, but and agents got a lot of good information. So, but I had to take a break from her to go a little bit more cosmic. But yeah. Andrew says, being an ancient smith, using that title just gives a sense of internal hierarchy. That's why you want to hold on to that so incredibly tight. It's okay, I understand. Yeah, you internalize hierarchy, Andrew. Because otherwise, if it's externalized, it's lording over you. If you internalize it, it neutralizes. If we're all a part of the same cosmic fabric, but then so try that. Look at something that you see yourself as apart from and wear the shoes of it and say you are that. Try it. Just see what happens. Okay, look, you gotta do the, okay, I'm gonna read one more of your comments, Andrew. Let's see. No, it just means you have a lot to say. So I'm telling you, this is your nudge. Not to say this was your only nudge, but it's a nudge for you to share on a platform. That's another way of dissolving hierarchy, right? You know, like If we all start sharing on our, creating platforms, then you're not getting like one piece of information from one thing. I actually just was watching a weird interview from Weird Al Yankovic. Y'all remember Weird Al Yankovic, who used to do those parodies? Back in the 90s, he would make parodies of like famous music videos. And I loved him. I loved watching his parody stuff. But he was saying, he was like, I struggle now to make parodies. I can't make parodies anymore because we live in a society now where everybody has their own niche that they're tuned into. So I can't make parodies of things that people will understand because everybody's plugged into their own channel. That's the dissolving of the Ancient Smiths hierarchy. Okay, that's the creation of more opportunities. And I was like, wow, I never thought of that. Yeah, that would be a hard time for Weird Al Yankovic living in like social media era where everybody's like plugged into their own thing, So yeah, I think I got to the main things. The Ancient Smiths are the metal workers who did not create alchemy. They did not create elements. They did not create the elemental realm. They created the gate system and the key system to hold those frequencies away from the masses. That's all they did. Okay. But this is why when you get into the elemental realms, there could be a lot of elemental corruptions. There could be a lot of weird, funky frequencies that you have to move through. You're speaking the language of the Ancient Smiths, the locksmiths. Locksmiths. There we go. They put it everywhere. Okay. You need to become a locksmith. You need to hold keys to dissolve that hierarchy. You need to bring that hierarchy inward. Okay. That dissolves this us versus them sort of frequency. And then you're able to access parts of yourself that you may have forgotten in the externalization of hierarchy. This is the alchemical process. But first we need to bring hierarchy to neutral. So what that means is if you've been wearing the mark of Cain, if you've been marked by certain bloodlines or frequencies, you will need to bring those frequencies to neutral. That's a part of the alchemical process. Ain't that right, Ancient Smiths? Y'all know I'm saying it. It's right. Y'all know it's right. You got to bring stuff to neutral first in order to create a new concoction. You can't just create off of the same BS that's been being perpetuated. You would need to neutralize the substance first before you could create your own. So what that might mean is we might be doing an interesting dance where Ancient Smiths mightn't be getting destiny swap from. I'm just going to neutral. I'm just being a good student and learning about the way alchemy works. Right? That's what you did. That's what y'all taught about that in your clubs, right? But I have the club. I wield the club. Thor sponsors this conversation. Hercules sponsors this conversation. Hanuman sponsors this conversation. Set sponsors this conversation. Heru sponsors, even mother killing Heru. Yep, he in it too. Everybody. Yep. The Ancient Smiths sponsor this conversation. So a lot about bringing the stuff to neutral might be like the same ones who created these clubs and stuff. We might need to come to neutral with some of these scripts first. That's not where we stop. We can alchemize and create something new from that. But, the folks that wear the mark of Cain, y'all might need to neutralize that. That ain't even yours. You're not Cain. You're not Cain. So you just need to neutralize that. Okay. But, the mark of Cain is not that you're Cain. It's literally that you've been marked by Cain. That's the way it happens. So how would you alchemize that? If you got marked or branded by a Canaanite, right? You would want to learn the art of metallurgy or metalsmithing and alchemy, because you would need to know, well, what created this brand, this mark on me? I need to learn exactly the consciousness of how it was created. How did it make this mark on my skin? You would need to study alchemy. You would need to become an alchemist. You would need to go into metallurgy and all that stuff. And that's when you can get into gene smithing as well. They do that is a possibility in the algorithm. You just need to have a certain coding in order to access it. Okay. And this is like more of a simulated game board sort of frequency that we get into. All right. And we have to do this because, we play the game board because it's like, imagine you get lost in a maze, right? Let's say that you get lost in a really complicated maze. Well, how would you get out of the maze? You would need to backtrack the exact way you came in. Even if you forgot or maybe you don't remember, you would still need to path work your way out. Okay. And as you do that, you collect aspects of your consciousness that you forgot about, and then you dissolve the maze as you go. So it's like you don't just, get out of the maze or out of the rat trap. You also neutralize it as you are finding your way back home out of the simulation. Neutral. You're also doing a great alchemical work as you path work your way out. So this is why sometimes it's useful to play the game, but no one said we have to play it fair. Okay. Nobody said how we have to play the game, because the beings who created what fair is certainly are not playing fair. They just created the rules for humans. You don't have to play fair. You could be a pirate. You might need to be a pirate, actually. Okay. We demonize pirates, right? But think about it. Imagine you're on a big ocean. Who's going to have access to the most boats and the most artillery? It's going to be the monarchs. It's going to be the hierarchs, right? It's going to be the ancient Smiths. They're going to have all that stuff. And so, of course, they're going to demonize pirates. But sometimes, look, you out in those wicked, wild seas, you got your little rickety boat. Look, sometimes you're going to have to run up on folks. I learned from the best. I learned from y'all, okay? That's all you do. Sometimes you're just going to have to run up, pirate some shit. All for entertainment purposes only. We're playing a simulated game board here. And nothing I say is real nor not real. I'm a bard. I'm an ancient smith. Anyway, peace, love y'all. Bye.